Hello, welcome everyone to today's IEEE webinar, How to Publish Open Access with IEEE to Increase the Exposure and Impact of Your Research. We're going to get started with our presentations in just a moment, but before we do, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Michael Spada of the IEEE, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. And I just wanted to point out a few things about the webinar platform so you can have the best experience for today's session. First of all, please note there is no dial-in number for the attendees for this event. So please make sure that your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so that you can hear our presenters. If you have any issues at all, any of a technical nature, please click the yellow question mark icon at the bottom of your console, and you can see answers to some common technical issues. If you have any questions at all, you can use the Q&A module. That's the purple square at the bottom of your module. You can ask questions of a technical nature there if you're experiencing issues, or if you have questions for our presenters. We're going to attempt to answer as many questions as possible during our time together at the end of the presentations. If you would like a certificate of participation for attending today's webinar, you can click the certificate icon at the bottom of your screen to request your certificate of participation, and that's an instant download. And you will have access to the recording of today's virtual event. That'll be made available a few hours after the webinar is completed, and you'll receive a link to the on-demand version that will be emailed to all registered attendees. So our topic today is how to publish open access with IEEE to increase the exposure and impact of your research. We're going to go through all the following topics and more: how to increase the visibility of your research, the benefits of getting published in open access journals, some tips and best practices to increase an author's chances to get published, what editors and reviewers look for in submissions, and some of the common reasons why papers are rejected. We're also going to review some authorship tools available from IEEE to make it easier for you to get published and also to help in promoting open science. And we'll go through the entire suite of open access options that are now available from IEEE. And of course, we're going to wrap up with a live Q&A session at the end where you'll be able to ask our experts. And these are the experts that are going to take us through this presentation. Professor Derek Abbott, who is the IEEE Access Editor-in-Chief from the University of Adelaide in Australia. Dr. Lajos Hanzo, who is an author and frequent contributor to IEEE publications from the University of Southampton, and Andrew Popper, who is the Senior Director of Global Products and Marketing for IEEE. So before we get into the presentations, I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about the IEEE. We're the world's largest technical membership association with approximately 420,000 members all around the world. We're a not-for-profit organization, and that's our tagline, Advancing Technology for Humanity. There are several core areas of activity for IEEE. We're a conferences organizer, and those conferences continue strong today, even amidst the pandemic, as IEEE has made a very strong shift from in-person events to virtual events. And many of those events are seeing record attendance and papers. So that has been a very strong shift by the majority of our conferences. We're also a standards development organization. You probably have heard of standards such as the IEEE 802 Wi-Fi standard, the ARC Flash standard, the National Electrical Safety Code, just to name a few. And we're a publisher of journals, conference papers, standards, ebooks, and e-learning materials. All that information is made available in the IEEE Xplore digital library, which now has approximately 5 million total documents and over 5 million unique users that use that database each and every month. And of course, we're also a membership organization. And I wanted to take this moment to thank the IEEE Region 8 for supporting this webinar. And if you're not familiar with IEEE Region 8, IEEE is divided into worldwide geographic locations, local sections, chapters, affinity groups. All of these enable members to network and to explore their technical interests as a community. So the IEEE Region 8 section has been very helpful in promoting this webinar to its members, authors, and prospective authors in countries all around the world. And Region 8 covers Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And we're lucky enough to have several members of IEEE Region 8 leadership here on the line with us today and in attendance. So thank you all very much for your support of this event. If you'd like to learn more about IEEE Region 8 activities, you can go to the URL at the bottom of this slide, and you can find out about membership activities, student activities, some of the technical activities, and some of the flagship conferences that, as I stated, continue on today. So some of the conferences include Eurocon, Melicon, AfriCon, HistoCon, and EnergyCon. And there's an example of one of the recent virtual meetings, the online sections chair from just from June 2020 on the far right-hand side. So if you want to learn more about IEEE Region 8, please go to this URL. You can also go to IEEE.org/communities to learn about other activities in your region. And that's what IEEE is all about, inspiring a global community of innovation. Our core mission is to foster technological innovation and excellence for the benefit of humanity. There are many core values and goals related to that overall mission. I've just listed a couple of them here. One of them is to be a trusted and unbiased source of technical information and forums for dialogue and collaboration. And one of our goals is to drive global innovation through collaboration and the sharing of knowledge. So with those core values and goals in mind, it makes sense that IEEE would strive to support all of our authors in sharing their research and sharing that knowledge with readers globally. That means that we're able to offer any author a publication venue that's compliant with their circumstances, regardless of their funding status, any publishing mandates they may have, or where in the world they might work. And open access is one part of that larger open science movement to make scientific research and data accessible to all. IEEE is working to enable that change to create better tools and publication opportunities for authors and researchers. And this is an open access program that has evolved significantly over the last couple of years. IEEE offers 3 options now for open access publishing, all designed to meet the varying needs of our authors throughout their careers. And we have published thousands of open access articles in IEEE Xplore. A little later on today, Andrew Popper is going to take you through all these options, but we now have nearly 200 journals and magazines spanning an array of technology fields. In terms of fully open access topical journals, we have now more than 20 of them, and we have a multidisciplinary open access journal called IEEE Access, which has published thousands of articles and is the largest engineering and computing open access title in the field. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Professor Derek Abbott, who is the editor-in-chief of IEEE Access. Derek is a full professor of electrical and electronic engineering at the University of Adelaide in Australia. His interests are in the area of multidisciplinary electronic engineering and physics applied to complex systems. His research programs span a number of areas: game theory, photonics, energy policy, biomedical engineering, computational neuroscience. He's received a number of prestigious awards, including from the Australian Research Council Future Fellowship, the David Dewhurst Medal for Biomedical Engineering, the Barry Inglis Medal for Measurement Science, and the M.A. Sargent Medal for Eminence in Engineering. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Derek.
Thank you. So in case people are wondering where exactly I am in the world, here is the true map of the world. And I'm based in a city called Adelaide in Australia, which is marked by that red arrow. And I'm also based at the university named after my city, University of Adelaide. It's an old university that's been around since 1874, as you can see in the photo. The building I work in, though, is the one on the right, the engineering building, and I'm on the 3rd floor there. Just a little bit about our university and its community. We graduated the 3 Nobel Prize winners shown on the top row. The 2 guys on the bottom row were not Nobel Prize winners, but they were pretty up there. As you can see, the first guy, Oliphant, discovered those isotopes that are very important today. And also Fisher is well known to all engineers because he devised the maximum likelihood method and the Fisher-Kolmogorov equation and Fisher information, of course. He actually gave lectures here towards the end of his life in the early 1960s, and he's still buried here today. Okay, so that's just a bit of a background of where I'm from. So what is IEEE Access? So it's a multidisciplinary journal that's fully open access. It's a proper archival journal. It's all electronic, so there's no print version. And it basically covers original research and practical developments across all the IEEE's fields of interest. So if you're wondering what are IEEE's fields of interest, just, go on the IEEE webpage, Google it, and have a look at all the kind of names of societies and topics they cover. And you'll be quite surprised that, we do all kinds of things other than just hardcore electrical engineering. There's like biomedical engineering, management, education, geoscience, a whole bunch of stuff. And each article is supported by article processing charge that the author pays for. Okay. So how's this journal doing? Well, we've we've managed some great accomplishments on IEEE Xplore. We usually dominate the top 10 most popular articles listed. We've been ranked the #1 journal in IEEE Xplore based on monthly downloads. We're indexed by Scopus and Compendex and on Clarivat. And we received the 2015 Prose Award for the Best New Journal in STEM. So what's special about IEEE Access? Why is it popular? And what are its key features? So one feature is that it's a binary decision journal. So what that means, so if you haven't submitted here before, don't be surprised by this, is the decision is either accept or reject. So that's what binary decision means. So what that means in practice is even if your paper has slight modifications needed asked by the reviewers, your paper is still rejected. However, you're invited to resubmit it. So when I first encountered this way of working, I thought that was a little bit strange myself, admittedly, but I've come to realize that that's actually quite a sensible way to operate for a huge journal such as this that's dealing with thousands of papers. Because it's by no means a small boutique journal. It's a very large journal. And it's the best way to basically process the workflow of a very large journal. And so what that's doing is it's putting the sequence of events back into the control of the author. So the author has complete control over that paper when it's rejected. You can decide to send it somewhere else, or you can decide to send it back to Access with an update and a reply to the reviewers. So it's a good thing. Think of it as returning the control back to you. The other nice thing that gives you control is that all authors retain copyright, provided that you accept the Creative Commons by license, which everyone does. The papers are on the IEEE Xplore platform with free access in perpetuity, as is for all IEEE journals. And a key thing for European listeners here is the journal is completely Plan S compliant. So it's a great go-to journal, especially if you're having to meet requirements of your government and your funding bodies. As for all IEEE journals, we have online usage and citation data online. Also, reader comments can be added online. Anyone can comment on any paper. And as for all IEEE journals, submissions are screened for plagiarism prior to peer review. So that is quite strictly done. And that's true of all IEEE journals. Okay, what about specific features? So here's a little strange feature that might surprise some of you, is we actually have no page limit. Well, it's an online journal with no real print, so why not? Now, the idea of this page limit is actually to serve you as an author, because I'm an author too. I'm a very active author myself, and I find it frustrating as an author when I send a paper, say I've slaved over a 20-page paper, send it to a journal, and the editor writes back to me and says, oh, you've got to reduce it to 15 pages or 12 pages or whatever, and then you spend a whole month trying to retailer it. So because we're a fast journal, we position ourselves as a very fast turnaround journal. We think it's important to have no page limit because we don't want to limit you with that time constraint of having to change your page number all the time. Now, when we say no page limit, it's not an open invitation to send us a 200-page paper. The idea is it's still a normal length paper, but we're not going to send the paper back to you because you're a few pages longer than normal or whatever. So if your page is starting to get rather long, like over 40 to 50 pages, we do recommend you take a hard look at that and opt to put some of the contents of your paper in supplementary section. Because, you know, when a paper does get too long, your citation rate goes down. So you're not serving your own best interests. So that leads me to my second point, which is we do have a supplementary material section, which is quite common for IEEE journals. We have a very wide scope. This is a special feature. This is also serving our authors in a special way, because what this means is, as an author, you know, you can get frustrated when you have a paper that crosses maybe two discipline boundaries and you send it to journal A or B and they both reject you because it's not quite in their scope. So the great thing about our scope is we're broad enough that provided you're in the IEEE's areas of interest, you won't get rejected based on scope. So that's another frustration that is reduced. Another thing is because we're such a large journal, we don't mind debate articles that tend to debate points and maybe slightly controversial. Usually small boutique journals don't like to get into this area, but for a big journal, you know, we have a thick skin, and we want to serve the community. And so if having a debate about a particular point is important, we want to support that. So provided the debate is done in a very scholarly and professional way, we will publish it. And a hallmark of a debate paper is probably half the reviewers will want to reject it. So we recognize that, and provided there's balance in your paper and it's done in a scholarly way, we will definitely consider it, even if some reviewers are saying to reject. Yeah, controversy can be used in a positive way if done nicely. If you do have a debate article, if you feel you've got a paper that's going to crush the next paradigm, if that's what you want to do, IEEE Access is a go-to place for that. Now, another interesting feature, as with most IEEE journals, you can disagree with a reviewer when you're applying, when you're doing your reply letter to the reviewers. But in IEEE Access, I believe we've kind of streamlined that a bit better. We expect you to, if you do disagree, to clearly disagree, give your reasons, support your reasons in your reply letter. And not only that, but to make that point transparent by actually adding it to your paper. So if you just keep it in your letter and don't transparently put your counterpoint in the paper, you may be rejected. So long as you maintain complete transparency, you can be okay if there is a technical disagreement. We have a special reply letter template to facilitate a clear reply letter, and it's compulsory to use that. Next point, as you can see over the years, in a short space of time, we've grown very rapidly in the size of our journal. And in that short space of time, we shot up to an impact factor of slightly over 4, which is very good for that short time. In terms of eigenfactor, which is another good metric that's on Clarivet, we are the number 3 journal in about 300 journals in electrical engineering. And in the telecommunications category, we're number 1 for eigenfactor. So now so that's enough about IEEE Access. Now some tips how to get published in IEEE Access and how to have a good author experience. So first of all, check you're in scope. So as I said, it's got a very broad scope anyway, so long as you're under the IEEE umbrella of topics, you should be okay. We do get a lot of papers, surprisingly enough, that are just pure mechanical engineering, pure civil engineering, and purely mathematical only papers that are clearly written for a mathematics journal. Those all get rejected, unfortunately, because they're not really under the IEEE scope. So please don't send those to us. It's surprising how many papers I receive on blowing up rocks and crushing rocks. I don't want to see those. Okay. The other tip 2, is to write a quality paper to start with. So you need to have original and innovative research. As with all IEEE papers, we need to see kind of comparisons to show that what you have produced is actually better than something before. It's actually gone up a level. Experimental validation is always highly valued in all IEEE transactions, and it's the same here. Make sure you've got these sort of elements to pass as a quality paper. If you're publishing for the first time in IEEE, look at quality IEEE papers online from any IEEE journal. Download copies of papers that are highly cited, and kind of look at all the elements in the paper and do your own quality check. Check those papers against yours. Have you got all the elements of those papers in yours? It's very important for all co-authors to thoroughly proofread their papers before submitting. It's surprising how many papers I receive and I reject straight away, because clearly the first author may be a very junior author and there's a bunch of senior authors after. and there are just so many elementary errors right throughout the paper, and the senior authors have clearly not even read it. So that is not a good look to send us such a paper. And run through your own paper through your own university's plagiarism software before you send it to us. Most universities these days subscribe to plagiarism software to check on your students. Use that same software to check your own papers. You might think there's no plagiarism in your paper, but you might surprise yourself. There can be some unconscious reuse of passages. It's important to nip those in the bud yourself. Tip 3, format mathematics properly. So for that, check the IEEE guidelines on formatting maths. There's nothing worse than receiving a paper as an editor where the maths just looks like a mess and is hardly readable. Now, there's no IEEE policy about which package you use, whether you use Word or LaTeX or whatever, but as an editor, my tip to you is to use LaTeX because it's the best package for formatting math correctly. So some common mistakes people make is at italicizing multiple letter variables and labels. Only single letter items are in italics, and physical units and functions are not in italics. Another mistake many papers do is they use the E notation for exponents. Use the proper scientific notation, 10 to the power of something, and don't use asterisks to mean multiply. Use the correct symbols. Or if you've got two italics variables together, you don't need a symbol between them. Things like E notation and asterisk are really designed for computer code, not for journals. It doesn't look good in a journal. Okay, develop clear figures. Tip 4, label your axes clearly. Use long descriptive captions. I favor long captions. I like a caption to basically talk the reader through what's going on in that diagram so I can understand that diagram carefully. Don't use fancy shading or backgrounds in your graphs. Use plain white backgrounds. Don't have more figures than text. I've seen some papers where they're just overloaded with figures, and the figures is actually overruns the whole paper, and then there's like 80 figures at the end of the paper. If you're in that situation, you need to consider using the supplementary materials section for those extra figures. Don't try and overcram your paper. And look at good IEEE papers and see how figures are sized appropriately to fill into the two-column format. Make sure you do that nicely. Next tip, check your references, use proper IEEE format. A common mistake is to not say art number when there's an article number. Many authors just put a P there. Check for missing bibliographic details, like totally missing page numbers and stuff like that is a no-no. And when you get the bibliographic details, go to the actual paper itself, download the paper. Don't take the details off a database, because quite often there are mistakes on those databases. A very common mistake is I see papers where half the references in conferences all begin on page 1. It's impossible to have 20 references from conferences all beginning on page 1. Obviously, something is wrong there. It's because it was copied off a database. You need to actually look at the real reference and see what the real page number is. And if it doesn't have one, use the DOI number. Minimize use of tables. Don't overuse tables. Try to use graphics and charts and graphs in preference. If you really have to have very large tables or lots of them, consider the supplementary section. It's a turn off to see a paper which is just totally overloaded with tables. Be self-critical about your own paper. before the conclusions, consider having a section called Limitations of the Study and add your own critique. Get in there before your reviewers beat you to it. That's a good trick, a good tip for most papers. Have open questions. Like any good, exciting work should stimulate new questions. So put forward-facing open questions in your conclusions. If you've got a lot of open questions, even consider having a section called open questions towards the end, near to the conclusion. Tip 9, thoroughly proofread your paper. Remember, this is a fast journal with a very fast turnaround time, and there is very little copy editing because of that. So think of your paper as an almost camera-ready manuscript. Take care with your details. A colleague of mine a number of years ago visited Cambridge University and saw this notice at Cambridge. It said, because of the impracticability of an examiner's establishing the details of the conduct of the research, the care with which the thesis is prepared will be taken as prima facie evidence of the care with which the research has been carried out. So treat your paper in the same manner. Thank you. Oh, one more last tip I forgot. Tip 10, be visible as an author. It's a good idea for you and your co-authors to be on Google Scholar and to be on Publons, to all have Publons profiles. If you're on Publons, the added bonus is our database of reviewers is connected to Publons, so you're more likely to be selected as a reviewer for IEEE Access if you're on Publons. And it's now compulsory, it's now IEEE policy that all papers, all authors should have ORC IDs linked to their IEEE paper. It's not universally enforced in the IEEE, but it is an IEEE policy that you should do that. And we are stepping up our enforcement of this. So try to be ahead of the game and have all your co-authors put your ORC IDs in right from the beginning. Okay, I would like to now hand over to our next speaker, Lajos Hanzo. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. That was an excellent presentation. We've received a number of questions I can see in the chat, and we'll address those at the end following all the presentations from our speakers. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Lajos Hanzo. He is a professor and chair at the University of Southampton in the UK. He received his master's degree from the Technical University of Budapest. He is awarded the Doctor of Sciences degree by the University of Southampton and honorary doctorates by TU of Budapest and the University of Edinburgh. He is a foreign member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and a former editor-in-chief of IEEE Press. He has served several terms as governor of both IEEE Communications Society and the Vehicular Technology Society. He has published over 1,900 contributions to IEEE Xplore and 19 Wiley IEEE Press ebooks. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Lajos.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. It can only go downhill from this point, having read out all my sins over the past decades. And so even after all these decades, I consider myself a student of our game, and a very warm welcome to you all. My hope is I will be able to sort of share some of my excitement about research as a whole and the publishing process. And so I just really Derek would like to show you where I sit right now. Since I have close family in about 4 European countries, I'm a staunch European. And the UK is still in Europe until the end of this year. So this is London. I don't know whether you can see my cursor moving, probably not, but down here at the bottom of the slide you see this island, which is the Isle of Wight, is where Marconi for the first time ever demonstrated the feasibility of radio transmissions. And up to the current era, I would call this the communications era version 1.0. So you would have guessed right that I work and research and teach in telecoms and signal processing, and in the past kind of 6-7 years or so in quantum communications, which I consider communications version 2.0 just beginning, and there's a lot of excitement right across the IEEE about quantum communications and quantum technologies. About 6 societies have signed up to the new initiative within the quantum sciences. So maybe just one point of interest is that Southampton is where the Titanic set sail on that fatal journey. So many people know Southampton from that, even featured in the film. And so Southampton Wireless, this is in our building, the Mountbatten building, and we are at the top floor, and below us here, this kind of interesting pattern actually is an optical inverter in the Optical Research Center, where they invented the erbium doped fiber amplifier, which facilitates optical transmissions right across all Atlantic cables today. So let me take a little step back and really just sort of look at a career in research. You know, some people who don't work in this line of work and don't publish, they might even just consider it as an intellectual game for sort of big boys, if you like, or eternal students. But in actual fact, it is really the powerhouse of the economy, although only a few years down the line, and hence investment into research is vitally important, and publications are obviously part of that process, as I will portray later on more graphically as well as we go along. So Edison himself said, you know, research is really not pure inspiration, but a little bit of inspiration where we've got the initial inkling of an idea, and then 95% perspiration, where we actually have to work on the fine details and turn it into digestible outcomes, which then appeal to the rest of the scientific community. And this is why the publications are so vitally salient part of this process. Also, Louis Pasteur said, luck favors the prepared mind. So what does that mean? You know, what is the prepared mind? Well, a mind that has been fed with ideas and has been well educated and is willing to share the ideas and willing to use this as the yeast, the catalyst of the economy as a whole. So I tried to sort of summarize this into the 7 habits of highly successful researchers, which I learned from many of my friends. And of course, the rewards are really obvious. You get promoted, you get a better and more interesting career, a more rewarding career. And on the whole, you know, it's more like, again, an intellectual game, but with a purpose. So just to summarize some of these points I alluded to, if you happen to be a new PhD student who is just starting out in research, you got your excellent master degree, and you are curious by nature, and you really want to move forward, and you are excited about research and publications. Obviously, it starts with really just reading and identifying problems, right? As a first step, what we might like to start out before even writing a paper, and I'm sort of really using Derek's presentation as a springboard, because we have to have a gap analysis which tells us where the open problems are. There's no point really writing paper 1001 on the same subject, even if it's slightly different, and even if there's no plagiarism in it, because you're not going to get much attention and not going to make much impact. So we try to really sort of analyze the gaps, the knowledge gaps, before we move forward. And in this context, we have to use the quality journals, not really, you know, sort of unrefereed contents on the web, for example, which has never been through the rigorous publication process. Experimenting, verifying is the next stage in a PhD, for example, because you have to be able to reproduce some of the results used as benchmarkers in your studies. And so that's very important. You know, industry also verifies, by the way, the scientific results before they actually decide to, say, get into quantum communications or some radically new research subject, you know, frontier research subject. So writing and characterizing these contradictory design trade-offs, because in engineering, there's no best solution. Either you really want to buy a Ferrari Testarossa for racing, or you want to buy a Range Rover to go up in the mountains. But Pareto optimization is a subject in mathematics. Sorry about this sort of very specific scientific language, but basically we have to really find the best trade-offs for the job. And, you know, this is part of, again, a good scientific paper. What I love about IEEE Access, again, is the unlimited page numbers, which allows you to ramp up the subject very nicely. So you can appeal to a very broad audience where those who are experts in other fields, they might really sort of start from the beginning and learn in a tutorial fashion quickly the basics to get them to the research elements. And the experts can sort of skip through that, but go to the research part of the paper. So discussions, collaboration across the board, you know, even internationally. Today, you know, Derek is in Australia, our friends are in New Jersey, in IEEE, and I'm sitting in the UK. And so, you know, this is how we often collaborate. We get onto Zoom, Skype, and actually really putting on the boxing gloves, if you like, and fight out those kind of design dilemmas or scientific dilemmas which Derek alluded to, which find their way often into those papers, which are speculative to a degree. So publishing and getting involved in reviewing and refereeing is part of it, because you have to go and look at it from the other side as well. And the moment you submit a paper for publication, you really owe 3 to 5 reviews to the system. So ultimately, it's our duty really to facilitate that process. Reflection, generalization of the findings, you know, that leads to the next paper. Derek really spoke about, you know, listing the open questions. And you know, every research is really a journey. So basically, you know, what are the next stages in this journey? Really, this was just in a nutshell to share my excitement with you. And, you know, research, again, is a bit like a sort of turbo engine, if you like. I quite like to use this analogy because you could argue that the fuel is the funding. We obviously need some funding to keep the research students, PhD students, postdocs, and so on, academics working. Oxygen is the new talent, basically, and those are, you know, the potential future scientists who now want to go through the PhD and learn how to do this. The universities is really reminiscent of the turbo engine of people's career, basically. Now, again, in a longer talk, I would probably elaborate on this in more detail, but given the limited time we have here today, I just move on and say a few words still about this research hype cycle based on Gartner's vision, and really we come all from the umbrella or from under the umbrella of the IEEE. This slide indicates a lot of heterogeneous research topics, but whatever is your research area, there will be a phase where people get excited. You know, I quite like to perhaps use quantum computing and quantum technologies down here at the bottom left corner, indicated by that little yellow triangle, because, again, there's a lot of excitement in this area, but it will be 10 years before it's actually contributing to wealth creation. But it needs thousands of new PhD students really playing with the IBM quantum computer in the web, in the cloud, for example, and innovate. But if you want to do this kind of research in 5-10 years' time, you will get, you know, limited rewards for your efforts. And this is why publications the submission to publication time is so critical. If you look at this very steep slope, there's very little time on the horizontal axis for you to climb from the innovation trigger, if you like, to the peak of inflated expectations. So you want to publish your papers within that phase, because that's where you get a lot of attention. Again, I don't have too much time to elaborate on this in the context of other technologies, but there's this good decade or so time between the bottom left and bottom right corner, where finally research is starting to contribute after what might be called as a trough of disillusionment to wealth creation. So really just to provide you with a specific example of how powerful access is in this process. And some of you who work in signal processing and communications would know that millimeter wave communications is extremely hot at the moment. It's kind of become hot around about the same time when IEEE Access was started. And my own personal story with Access also started at the same time, because I was asked to write a paper for the inaugural issue. So it was an invited paper, and I had a paper on quantum communications which straddled the physics and the electronic engineering sides. So I said, bingo, this is excellent. There was no page limit, there was no page charge for the inaugural issue, and I'm very happy I did that. And ever since then, I couldn't stop publishing in Access because I love the speed of it. Now, this is, however, not my citations. I wish it was, but it's actually Professor Ted Rappaport's, and he also contributed an article to that issue, which has had now 5,000 citations. And look at what it has done to his career since 2014. It rocketed to 8,000 citations a year. So, what more eloquent justification, really, for publishing open access and in IEEE Access. I'm almost done, just really a few more thoughts why I still carry on with these publications. This variety of different research articles, which Derek already alluded to, so I will not really talk about these in great detail. If you're really desperate, just drop me an email. But obviously, I haven't even touched upon lots of issues. I just want to emphasize again that with the dawn of communications and signal processing version 2.0, I think this journey will be repeated in the quantum area. So thank you so much. I enjoyed chatting to you.
Well, thank you so much, Lajos. That was definitely very interesting and a lot of great insights in there. And I'm seeing a number of questions related to your presentation show up in the chat, which we will address in a little bit. But I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Andrew Popper. He's the Senior Director of Global Products and Marketing at IEEE, where he manages research and development, discovery, and design of new products. So with that, I will hand it off to Andrew.
Hello, everybody. Basically, I'm going to go through a few points in regards to the overall open access program and open science program at IEEE. We've already mentioned and put a good deal of focus on IEEE Access, but there are also 21 fully gold open access journals other than IEEE Access, and about 200 subscription journals that also have an open access option. We also do data sets through a product called Dataport and executable code through CodeOcean, and we also have a new preprint server called Tech Archive. So historically for IEEE, we actually started to get involved in open access back in 2008 when we launched a hybrid model allowing for subscription journals to offer an open access option. Our photonics journal, which is a key journal for us, flipped to fully gold in 2012, and then a year later, Access came out and launched. And we also expanded the hybrid open access model across all of our subscription journals. Access received its first journal impact factor in 2016, and as you could see, it has climbed steadily throughout the years since then. We've really ramped up and invested heavily in our open access options in just the last 2 years. We have had IEEE Access and 5 long-standing single discipline journals in open access, and we've also added 15 new open access journals, actually 16 now, and it continues to move very quickly. Our focus is on trying to provide for each one of our fields of interest a clear, fully gold open access option that's compliant with the mandates for each one of the fields, whether it be an independent journal dedicated to that field or IEEE Access. We very much believe in author preference, and our primary mission is to foster technological innovation. So that means supporting authors with an opportunity to share their research with publication options that are compliant with their circumstances, regardless of what their funding status is, regardless of the publishing mandates that they have in place and where in the world they may work. So we support that ongoing mission by providing multiple options for all of our fields of interest. As I think most people know, we have been extremely strong in terms of our citations, in terms of where we stand in each one of our fields of interest. You could see how we're usually in some cases we have all 5 of the top 5 journals in particular spaces, but now we've added 16 new open access journals to that group, and it continues to develop, and we expect to grow even more. Right now we have 22 fully gold open access journals. We have some more that are expected to come in the next year, and all of our fully gold open access journals are fully compliant with Plan S and other mandates that have been coming around. And so that has been a big focus for us. With open access, we stress key factors to success. Meeting or beating the quality metrics that we've been able to hit with our premier subscription titles is a key aspect. Derek discussed this just a moment ago. With meticulous peer review, and so we do not drop our standards in terms of things for open access. We believe in the open access option, but we don't believe in hurting quality. And the speed of publication decision and publication itself is extremely important in this area, and we have been really working to condense that speed without giving up on those quality standards. And geographic and institutional diversity of authorship is also something that we want throughout, and we look to invite papers across the globe and across all types of institutions. We have an open access program for institutions itself. You may want to actually check to see whether your particular university might have a institutional open access agreement with IEEE. And as you could see, we have several institutions that do this. We have also brought in with RightsLink Scholarly Communications, an administrative tool that's been tailored for our use so that we can have easy application of article processing charges, and also allow for easy acceptance of different articles by the institution if there's such a plan in there. There you see some more of these institutions. And with that, I would also point out that our open science program also looks at expediting and reproducibility of research. And that's why we started a deal quite some time ago with a company called CodeOcean that allows for researchers to upload their code free of charge, and users can access that code and its executable code without a subscription, so long as it's associated with an IEEE article. IEEE Dataport is a dataset repository, and it has grown tremendously in the last year, and has been very successful for us. And we launched Tech Archive not even a year ago, that allows researchers to post early and with fully open versions of their articles prior to peer review. And it allows for some feedback to come in, and it's been a very nice service that we've been providing at no cost to the author community. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Andrew. And I just wanted to take this moment to inform the audience or remind you of some additional tools and resources available from IEEE to help you in the publishing process. One of them is the IEEE Author Center. So if you are not familiar with it, I would strongly suggest that you go to this site. Derek and Lajos provided a lot of really great tips and recommendations to help you in your journey to get published. The tools within this site really help you follow IEEE guidelines for your submission. So there is a publication recommender, to give you some tips as to what type of journal you should submit your article to. There's an IEEE template selector that I understand is very popular amongst authors, a LaTeX analyzer, a reference preparation assistant, and a PDF checker. So all of this, I think, could be extremely helpful to any author preparing a manuscript. And if you're looking for more information about our open access options, you can go to the IEEE Open site, open.ieee.org. More information on all the different journal options available. You can review their aims and scope to see if it's in line with your research. Learn about specific journals and new calls for papers and new and forthcoming titles. And there are some FAQs about publishing with IEEE. And you can also go to the IEEE Access site, IEEE.ieee.org, where you'll see new calls for papers and announcements, some of the submission guidelines and FAQs that Derek had reviewed with us, and you'll also see some featured articles. And hopefully we'll see your article featured here one day as well. So with that, we're going to go to our Q&A session, and scrolling through the chat, and I see there are a number of really good questions here, and we're probably going to end up going a little bit over for our Q&A session. So thank you all for hanging in there with us. As I scroll through, I see a good question here for Derek, and that is, why is the review period so short for IEEE Access? How is this possible? Derek, would you like to take that one?
This is a beautiful question. It's my favorite question. You know, it's a 7-day review period. And when I first saw that years ago, I was, my jaw dropped to the ground. I thought that was crazy. But I realize now that this is the magic of IEEE Access. This is why we're so successful and so popular, because we have a very fast turnaround time, and authors really appreciate that, not having to wait, 6 months to a year to get their paper published. So how does this 1 week thing work? Well, the secret is this. Think of what IEEE used to be like, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Me as an author 30 years ago, I submit a paper to IEEE. It takes a whole year to even get reviewed. I remember this. I go back that far ago. I go back that long ago. And even me as a reviewer 30 years ago, I was taking a whole year. And you know what happened when I took a whole year? That paper was sitting on my desk the whole year, and I got around to it the 1 week before the deadline. So that's the secret of the 1 week period, is that whatever time you give reviewers, they will do it in the last 1 week that you give them. Now, of course, there are special cases. Of course, there are cases where reviewers need a little longer than 1 week because maybe it's a highly controversial paper, maybe it's some super technical math details, whatever, and reviewers do genuinely need longer. That is still okay with IEEE Access because all the reviewer does is they request to the editor an extension and give a reason, and the editor will grant that. So there are cases where it does take a little longer for various reasons, but we still maintain this initial 7-day period, and this works beautifully. It's been working so smoothly, and it gets the bulk of our papers through very quickly. And the tricky papers that do need that little extra time do still get that extra time. So that's how it works.
Great.
May I just
Hello.
very
Thank you very
briefly
much.
chip in here? This is
Did you get that?
speaking.
Please go ahead, Lajos.
Yeah, just one little point on this really, because obviously as an author, with nothing to do with the review process, I'm at the receiving end, and right now I actually have a paper in review which has been in review for much longer, about 2 months, because it's a sophisticated paper on quantum communications, and indeed that's obviously what is happening right now. So there's a distribution in processing time. And I've been very frank here because obviously, again, as an author, I would like it to have been done, but it does happen that for a long, sophisticated paper, the period is longer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. And we're going to continue to go over time here. Thank you to our presenters and our audience. I can see that our audience on the webinar is hanging in, so I think they do want to hear from our presenters. Here's another question. I think this would be a good one for Lajos to address. Lajos, based on your experience, why would an author choose to publish an open access title as opposed to a traditional journal?
Right. So some of the reasons have been outlined by Derek, but I was personally also pondering this, and I take, so cast my mind back really to the 20, 30 years what Derek mentioned. And indeed, we did everything by snail mail, obviously posting the manuscripts, and then the reviews came back, dropping on your desk 12 months later, etc. And then I was really thinking, why on earth don't I just put this on the web when the web first actually occurred? And really see how people react. And this was really realized, this dream was realized by Access to a degree and by the open access papers, because in the end, if I go back to my valued friend and, talk about Ted Rappaport's fantastic paper, for example, do you think Ted would worry for a moment whether his paper was published just on the web or in IEEE Access or in transactions or communications or signal processing? Well, 5,000 citations voted for it. So in the end, it's really the quality of the paper. And I am aware that, obviously there are those who really have a little bit of a pushback on open access publications. But I do feel that in the current accelerated pace of research, the speed to publication. And this is, of course, where many people actually turn to archive, or Andrew mentioned Tech Archive, where people upload their papers. Although this can cause some problems during the plagiarism test, because if you upload to archive before you actually submit it to the journal, you will get 100% similarity, so the editor-in-chief will come back to you. I hope I was able to sort of highlight a little bit my perspective on this, and hence, in a nutshell, my attitude in general. If it's a long paper, which is especially on a radically new topic like quantum communications, I really need that longer scope to be able to sort of build it up gradually from first principles, so that the paper becomes self-contained and gets published very quickly, so that I get some feedback on it, which feeds into my research. And I allude to the turbo engine again, but I stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We have another question here, and I think this is probably a question for Derek, and that is, do I need to provide a list of potential reviewers when I submit a paper to IEEE Access?
Very quick answer. The answer is no. In fact, we do not allow you to suggest reviewers at all. So no need to do it. And there's a reason for that. We decided to just cut out any form of nepotism. So just keep it all simple. Simple as that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Derek. I have another question here, and I think this one is probably a good one for Andrew to address. It's about the cost. What is the typical cost of publishing open access with IEEE? And related to that, they asked about discounts for members and waivers. So, Andrew, would you like to take that one?
Sure. It really depends on the type of publication where you are publishing. For IEEE Access, the article processing charge is $1,750. For our gold open access journals, for almost all of them, it is the same cost, $1,750. There are a couple that are sort of legacy ones that have a tiered approach, but that is generally where it goes. In terms of our hybrid journals, or that is the subscription journals, the highly specialized traditional journals that we've had, the open access option is $2,045. And we also have some open access in some of our magazines, and you should check which ones when you're looking to submit. That is $2,995. So in terms of the discounts, there is for IEEE members a 5% discount for any APCs. There is also a 15% discount for IEEE Society members. However, the discounts cannot be combined or applied to any other fees. For example, some of the hybrid journals might have some page charges that are associated with it, and so that type of discount can't be applied there. And then the last thing that I would say is if an institution has say a read and publish or some sort of institutional open access deal with IEEE, things might differ a bit in terms of what the costs are, and there you should simply check with your administrator. Was there a question on waivers? We do provide a waiver policy for authors from certain low-income countries, and I think I answered all that question. If I missed anything, please let me know.
You got it all. Thank you very much, Andrew. I have another question here, and I think this one is for Derek. And I think they wanted you to clarify the binary decision process. And that is, I think the question is that peer review?
Yes, it is a fully peer-reviewed paper. You have a number of reviewers, and you'll get reviewer comments. So yes, it's a fully reviewed paper. Where the binary thing comes in is actually nothing to do with that. That's just another layer on top of that. So let me repeat what the binary process actually means. All it means is that papers are either accepted or rejected. So even if you need some fairly minor corrections, your paper is still rejected. And all that is doing is just a workflow mechanism. So it's giving the author back control of the paper. Because many journals that don't do binary decision, what tends to happen is that the paper is returned to the author and asked for questions, and usually that journal pressures the author and says, you must do it by a certain date and get back to us. We don't do that. We just reject the paper, give it back to the author, and the author can do what he or she wants with it. So the control is given back. That's what binary decision means. And it's just a form of workflow that works real well for a huge journal. Because when you've got thousands of papers, it's very difficult to track everything if you're doing it the traditional way. So binary decision is a nice workflow that puts the control back to the author.
Thank you very much, Derek. And we're just gonna go a couple of more minutes. I can see the vast majority of our audience is hanging in there, so we'll address a couple more questions. And I think this is a good follow-up to the last one, Derek, and that was, is the open access journal criteria for IEEE, is the quality criteria similar to traditional IEEE journals?
Absolutely. The quality criteria for IEEE Access is identical to all IEEE transactions journals. So we expect that type of quality.
Okay,
absolutely.
Thank you. And here's a question that I think either Derek or Lajos can address. Any tips you can offer to write and get published a review article?
Do you want to go first, Lajos, or shall I do that?
Okay, go ahead, and then I will just tag along. I do have some ideas as well.
Okay, I assume the question is asking tips for publishing a review article in IEEE Access, right?
Sure.
So, yeah. So for publishing a review article, you know, if it's a review, if a good review, you need to be looking at, you know, at least 100 references minimum if you're really doing a thorough review, if not more. And we like it in IEEE Access if you're reviewing a kind of a topical area that's emerging and getting hot. Those are the kind of reviews that we like. Another thing about reviews that you have to be very careful with is to bear in mind every paper does go through plagiarism software. And the problem with reviews is because you're reviewing other papers, it's very easy for authors to accidentally slip in paragraphs from other papers they're reviewing, more so than original research. So be very careful, and my advice is to use your own plagiarism checking software before you send us a review article. Those are my key tips. Over to Lajos.
So I view review articles as a set or family of articles because there are, as Derek said, very topical reviews. And before I would embark on writing a review paper, I would first check really how many review articles have been done on this subject recently. And if it's, say, I don't know, machine learning for face recognition or machine learning for communications, I would probably refrain from writing one because there is a good number of them already. So this is part of what I alluded to as gap analysis. And if there's no gap, there's no valuable contribution, even if you can publish it. So, that's the sort of first step of topical reviews. And then there is the other really important family in my view, namely the historical reviews, which actually go back to the beginnings of a subject area and really sort of almost provide the roadmap of how we reached capacity in communications, or how compressive sensing evolved from the early days, and now looking at the applications, there's a whole plethora of exciting new applications. And so these are different ones, and therefore, even if, for example, there is an article, a good machine learning for resource allocation paper, but if somebody looks across like 3-4 decades from the outset, then it's still worth writing that paper. Now, the final point I'd like to make in this context, again based on my own experience, is that I quite like the IEEE Communication Surveys and Tutorials journal as well, because again it didn't used to have any page limit, and I have been publishing in that from the outset as well. Its impact factor climbed up unbelievably to 22 point something. So it's the highest cited paper or highest impact factor paper in communications. But the process has become so prolonged and so complicated that it takes really potentially again over a year to have a nice review or tutorial paper published in there. And if the subject is very topical, as Derek said, if it's a hot subject, you don't actually know how many there are in the pipeline right now. And those would be the people who are also potentially reviewing your paper. So if it's one of these survey or review papers, I would rather probably go to Access for speed again, as I said. So I stop here. There's a lot more to all these stories, but I think it's probably answered the question.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lajos. With that, we were already gone more than 15 minutes over time. So thank you to our audience for hanging in there. I'm going to move us ahead to wrap up. One thing I wanted to note was if you enjoyed this webinar, there are other free resources from IEEE, and you can find them at the URL below, innovate.ieee.org/free webinars from IEEE. A variety of live and on-demand webinars to help universities and organizations adapt their curriculums and strategies to support distance learning and remote work environments. And there's more coming soon from the IEEE Educational Activities team. We will also find additional webinars to help authors get published and share their research. And we also have webinars to help researchers stay up to date and using tools delivered by the IEEE Xplore digital library to help you in your research as you prepare papers and in your journey to get published. So again, take a look at the link below, and you can see a number of different options here that are available live and on demand. I want to thank you all very much for your time and for hanging in there with us. Access to the recording of today's event will be available a few hours after this webinar. A link will be emailed to all attendees. If you want to find out more about open access options from IEEE, please visit open.ieee.org, Also, you can find out a lot of really great information at the IEEE Author Center. So please, we encourage you to visit the Author Center. A lot of really great tips and tricks there. And follow us on IEEE Xplore on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll be able to catch all the latest news related to our journals, open access, and tools available to authors. Again, a reminder, if you are interested in getting your certificate for attending today's session, please click the button at the bottom of your screen to download your certificate of participation. Thank you all very much for your time, to our attendees, and to our presenters for your excellent presentations today. Thank you, and we hope to see you all at a future webinar.